Good afternoon. We're here. This is the meeting of the Transportation for Economic Development in Hillsborough County. It's October 21st, and we're going to turn it over to our County Administrator, Mr. Merrill.
Yes, good afternoon, PLG members. Good to see you all again. We have a brief agenda today. We have two items. First is for me to update you on the presentations that have taken place since your August 12th meeting. And I will talk about that and just kind of refresh some of those issues for you. And then the next item on the agenda will be to introduce George Walton, whom you've already all met, but Senior Vice President of Parsons Brinkerhoff, who we selected as our transportation consultant. So with that, and then of course there'll be opportunity for questions along the way or at the end. So just to before I talk about some of the presentations, just to kind of refresh really what the message is. The message is really threefold. The effort of the Policy Leadership Group over the last year and a half is about jobs and economic development and what can we do to continue the great effort that we've sustained as the greatest job creator in the state, in the Tampa Bay area, and how do we continue that growth. Secondly, safety, public safety. How do we take care of safety issues that are pressing for our community, which is also an economic development issue. And thirdly, taking care of what we have, taking care of the assets, that roads that need to be repaved, sidewalks that need to be replaced. So really, everything comes back to those three main themes. Transportation is the tool to help us get there. I had the opportunity since your last meeting to meet with about 15 or so stakeholder groups around the county, and there's a list of those stakeholders attached to your agenda. I won't read them through, but it really represents a number of the key stakeholders, as well as beginning to talk with some homeowners association groups to get their feedback. This is just the beginning. This is not the end. We'll have a much deeper dive into the community after today, after you hear from George. And but I will say that really, if I had to boil down the theme of those discussions with these groups, it's really three things: immediacy, congestion relief, and equity. So what do I mean by immediacy? Immediacy is simply that there are pressing needs, and every group I spoke with felt that we needed to get things done. If we're going to do this, if we're going to ask people to pay for this, we have to make a commitment to get things in the ground quickly. Now, there are projects that will take longer, but there are certainly things that can be done to show results. Congestion relief speaks for itself. Every single group had a different sort of take on it, but everyone is concerned about congestion either as they experience it today or concerns about where we might end up in the future if we don't do something. And finally, equity really has two prongs. Equity being a feeling, a sense, a really desire, a demand, in fact, that everyone be treated with the same value and respect across the county. It's a very large county, as we know. Different needs across the county, but what I have told groups is that the value of a sidewalk to a community who really needs a sidewalk has the same value as a bus rapid transit somewhere else in the community. The dollars are different, clearly, but the value is the same. That a sidewalk is just as important to that neighborhood as bus rapid transit is to the riders. We have to maintain that theme because that is really what will differentiate us from others and from the effort in the past. The other piece of equity is how we pay for this, and I heard, expressions that, however we decide to pay for this transportation plan, it also has to be equitable. So immediacy, congestion relief, and equity are really the kind of the keynote of what I heard. So I have met with some of the chambers, as well as the EDC, Tampa Bay Partnership, West Shore Alliance, as well as a business group in Plant City. And I will say that you know, it's early days, and clearly this is not a scientific poll or expression. It's just my feeling after having been out there, that there truly is a will out there to do something that will take care of our transportation needs. I really, truly did not hear anybody say to me, you know, this is something we should not do, this is wrong, you're headed in the wrong direction. Didn't hear that. And no one said to me, I'm not willing to help pay for it. We didn't talk about that side of it so much, but just the feeling and the expression that there's a will, there's a recognition that there's a need, and that as long as it's a fair, equitable payment for value, getting back to the value proposition, everyone seems to want to hear more. And that's really all this is. I did a lot of listening, I did some talking, I did some educating, and there will be much more of this as we go down the road. As one of the members of the Brandon Chamber of Commerce said last night when I was out there speaking, you know, if we don't do something, we will begin the slow decline into a loss of jobs, into a loss of competitiveness, and it's just something simply that we need to do. So before I introduce, let me just stop there and see if there's any questions about that. If not, let me introduce George Walton, who is Senior Vice President, Parsons Brinkerhoff. Just to kind of refresh everyone's memories, at your August 12th meeting, you unanimously directed me to engage the services of a transportation consultant who could help us do this next phase of heavy lifting of public outreach, and also help us pull together a transportation plan, because what we have now is a menu of different options. We have many more needs than we probably have funding at this point, but to take that plan, to listen to the community, to engage with you and engage with others, to begin to weld and knit together a transportation plan that we can deliver to you in February or March of next year. So we did that. The services of Parsons was procured, and I'm going to purposely read this because there have been questions about this. I want to make sure that this is very clear. Procurement of Parsons services was conducted in accordance with the Consultants Competitive Negotiation Act, CCNA, as outlined in Florida statutes. The firm was selected along with 9 other firms to enable the county to have a group of qualified, pre-selected engineering firms to provide services when needed. Parsons was selected from the group of engineering firms using an authorized method called direct select. This method allows for the selection of a specific firm from the list to utilize that firm's expertise, skills, or resources. In this case, the policy leadership group requested a national firm with access to a broad range of professional and technical resources, as well as a demonstrated track record of developing successful transportation initiatives. A team of staff, along with one of our other consultants, Larry Scully, a nationally recognized infrastructure consultant, selected PB, Parsons Brinkerhoff, after assessing and evaluating the capabilities and interests of 4 firms that met the requirements of the PLG. Those firms included HTNB, Parsons, Reynolds, Smith & Hill, and HDR. So following that selection, which again was done according to statute and done according to policy, we engaged with Parsons in a very limited scope to get us to today, and that was a $53,234 scope that got us to today. And now what you're going to hear and what you've been provided in your backup is the next scope, next piece of the scope. This is substantial. It's enormous. It's almost a daunting effort, and I'm confident. I've had enough experience now with Parsons that they are the right folks to have on board with us. It's going to take a lot of heavy lifting. The dollars are not inconsequential, but in comparison to what it is we're trying to do, I believe it is value for money. And he can take you through the various pieces of the scope, not asking for a vote today. As I have noted to all of you in briefings, the budget that was approved by the board for this year, the FY15 budget by the County Commission, included $500,000 for transportation planning. and that is for this effort. And there will be a delta that we'll have to make up based on the projected scope of about $900,000. At the County Commission's last board meeting, I believe it was the last board meeting, they asked the MPO board to direct their staff to work with us to liberate, or see if we can find a way to liberate some grant dollars that they had received for use in this effort to help make up the difference. Hart may have some planning money that they were intending to use for their effort that perhaps could be used for this purpose, so we're going down a unified path. So we have $500,000 in the budget. We need another $400,000. Those are the other possible funding sources. But at this point, under the existing contract, under the existing funding, as long as no one stands up and throws something at me and tells me, you're heading the wrong direction, we're just going to move ahead. So we've got really, less than 6 months to deliver a product to you. I believe that in order to be a player in the 2016 election cycle, that we need to help you all be in a position where we're comfortable putting a ballot initiative on the ballot, taking that action in March of 2015 for the 2016 referendum election cycle. So that doesn't give us a lot of time, but we can do it. I believe the scope is tight, and we have experienced folks here. So with that, I'm going to ask George Walton to come up and take you through the process.
Welcome, Mr. Walton.
Thank you very much. Sitting here listening to the comments in terms of introductions, this type of stuff excites me on many, many levels. One, transportation planner. So seeing where we are and understanding how these types of conversations set us up for the future. It sets us up for the legacies. So the conversations we're going to be having over the course of the next couple of months are game-changing, and we need to understand how that reflects on where we're going to go. The second part that's exciting for me is a lot of people don't view transportation in the role perhaps that it should be. It's not just about bikes, peds, moving cars, buses, fixed guideway vehicles. It's literally about moving people. It's connecting where they live and where they work, where they play. And at the end, it's really about moving an economy. And when we change the conversation and understand it in that context, it helps us understand where we are and where we're going to go. What I would like to do is spend the next amount of time just reviewing and introducing what the overall scope of the work is and some of the activities we're going to be taking on in the course of the next several months. And you will see it's very aggressive, and we're going to need a lot of help and energy as we put this work together. I want to introduce the team. I want to review the scope. I want to talk a little bit about the schedule and then what our immediate next steps are associated with it. Mike provided a general overview, and I think in your packet there's information on who Parsons Brinckerhoff is. Just to set the tone, we are an international company. We are doing work literally around the world with about 13,000 employees, and we want to bring those resources to bear as we go through these conversations. There's lessons learned in communities around this country that can help us understand the conversations that we're going to be moving forward with. I think the one thing that we really pride ourselves on is we're experienced in the conversations, working in the stakeholder realm, and understanding the policy components, the public engagement components, and being able to sit across the table from the layperson and explain what the different transportation elements are. That's important as we get into the dialogue and carry these conversations on, along the way. So being able to do that is one of the things that we're very proud of and that we can accomplish. I think it's also to note that even though I represent 13,000 people from around the world, we have been in Tampa since 1973. So we are local. We understand, and we've been engaged in a lot of the activities that are going on in the community. As Mike mentioned a little bit earlier, one of the reasons we were selected was that national experience, and some of the components are highlighted here. We did not go into the laundry list of all the transportation plans and all the things that we've done in all the different communities, but I do want to point out one of the things as we go through, we've been part and parcel of an awful lot of these activities in different roles and responsibilities, some from just policy all the way through to program implementation. So as we go through the course of the conversation, these again are the experiences that we will bring to work for you as we carry ourselves forward. Just by way of introduction, some of you know me. 29 years of professional experience. I've been fortunate to have worked across the country. I enjoy that. I've been fortunate to have worked on multimodal projects. So I'm not the one that's going to come here with a predetermined answer. I'm the one that's going to come here with the ability to listen, with the ability to engage, and the ability to carry on that conversation so that we hear both sides of the debate. There's always pros and cons of every type of alternative that you can bring into play. So I'm going to bring my experience in leadership to partner with Mike and engage on all the activities that we're going to be talking about. Again, I want to highlight our local experience, and this is Hillsborough County experience. We have worked with all these agencies, developing plans, developing projects, developing programs, and moving forward with the implementation of those activities. Again, I want to make sure that you understand that we are working locally, and we will continue to do so. In terms of the overall scope review, it's quick to point out that this is a continuation of the work that y'all have already started. We're not starting fresh. We're picking up on all the activities that you've done over the course of the last year. We're taking into account work that's being done by other transportation providers along the way, and we're moving forward with developing a transportation plan. Now, to develop that plan, there's a couple of pieces that we're going to be doing associated with it. Obviously, it's the professional transportation work, but then there's the public engagement, and then there's the stakeholder outreach. And I'm going to talk a little bit in detail about how we plan to move forward on that. As we go through and we start off a process, we tend to look at things in a couple of fashions. One is the technical. That's the transportation plan itself. The second part is how do we engage the public, stakeholders, and opinion leaders in developing the plan back and forth as to how we pull that off. There's data collection on both sides. Some of it's technical. Some of it's going to be market research and outreach activities as we dig into the communities and we listen and learn and understand the relationships of what they want and how that engages back into what transportation solutions are most appropriate. At the end of the day, the challenge is to deliver to y'all a community-based transportation plan. It needs to be built from the grass level on up. So as we go through and we do that, not to get too much into the weeds, there's data collection, analysis, and work like that that's going on. But what I want to talk about is the certification of the project list. Mike alluded to, we need to look at the entire life cycle of a project when we start to talk about programming. So first and foremost, we need to take care of what we've got. And then we can look forward about where can we expand and look at capital expansions, et cetera. But when we're certifying that project list, one of the things that we'll be doing with all of the engagement activities is get a good sense and understanding of what is the scope of that project. From that, then, we can understand what is the cost of that project. And I want to be, again, quick to point out, that's not just the capital cost associated with building the project. There's costs associated with developing that project from the planning and the engineering and the environmental work. And then there's also costs associated with the operations and maintenance. We want to make sure that those dollar values are being represented when we come back and talk about actual project costs associated with it. We have some technical tools that we're going to use, and I'm going to elaborate a little bit further on this PRISM tool because I think it will be helpful for all to understand how that works. But the one thing that we like to talk about when we're discussing PRISM as a tool, it's successful. It's been used in other places to actually get money through grant programs. Some of the statistics you see here, we've been able to use the programs to gather 21 Tiger grants totaling of almost $500 million. So what I'm saying to you is the tool has validation behind it, and again, I'll elaborate there. All of the technical analysis, though, is going to be vetted out through the public works. So as we're engaging with the communities and we're exchanging information back and forth, we need to understand how those relationships play themselves into each other to develop the conversations. Now, PRISM, again, I'm not going to go into the specific details. Just want to highlight it's an economic tool. We're going to be looking at the benefit costs associated with projects, and I'll define them as project packages. So in other words, we're not going to look at necessarily at every single one of the projects, but we'll look at how they're grouped. We'll understand the relationships between those groups and what the return on the investments are as we move ahead to do the development of the technical analysis. Again, I cannot overemphasize the importance of the community engagement and where we're going to move forward on all the activities. The technical work is not going to be done in a vacuum. The technical work will be presented in a variety of tools and techniques so that we can understand what the outputs are and how we use those in the decision-making realm. Mike has already been out meeting with a variety of groups, including the Chambers of Commerce, economic developments, and civic associations along the way. As he mentioned, we're getting very positive feedback up until this point. We'll continue that process and we'll understand and listen to, again, both sides of the conversation because some of the alternatives will have some polarizing comments associated with them. We understand that, but let's get out there and let's understand what each of the alternatives are and how they play themselves out. Now, we talk about the public engagement, and we're modeling it after Envision, and I'll describe that a little bit later and how it's structured, because we want to reach out into smaller communities, bring that back up into the regional conversation as to how the things play out. We want to speak in one voice. We, as the project team, will develop information that y'all can use in different distributions of materials, i.e. we might write paragraphs that can be used in community newsletters, we'll have brochures, we'll have websites, we'll have opportunities for the communities to engage in multiple points along the way. Now, we tend to talk about who the key audiences are. Obviously, in a project of this nature, there are going to be a lot. Just to highlight some of them, obviously elected and appointed officials, neighborhood and business groups, economic and civic engagement groups, transportation agencies and service providers, transit supporters, tax and government watch groups. We want to make sure we're hearing from, again, all sides. Area professionals, architects, engineers, planners, urban designers, folks that are looking at this from their own perspectives and where they can offer help. Real estate companies, what do they see? If we add these types of transportation components, where are the opportunities for economic development? Social, cultural, and educational groups will be engaged. Minority and religious groups will certainly be out there. And then groups that may not see where their stake is in projects at this point in time, but we can have the conversations to understand where the vision is and where we go and where opportunities can become realities. So as we go through and work on that broader public engagement, we want to stimulate the interest. We want to have the conversation. We want to understand what's going on out there, because we want to get into and understand from that personal community perspective what is relevant, what isn't, and how do we foster that momentum to get towards an implementation phase, because that's the ultimate intent of any plan, move towards implementation. We don't want to have a plan that just sits on a shelf. So we want to be able to provide those types of things that lead towards the communication and specific projects and initiatives as we carry forward. I want to walk through just very quickly kind of the process of the public engagement. So you can look across the top and you see the understanding the needs, exploring the options, making choices, and finding consensus. In essence, what we're doing is we want to go out and listen. We want to verify what we heard. We then want to develop scenarios and alternatives and packages therein and test them. And then we want to come back with the recommendations. So the way we're discussing, well, even before I get in there, so along the way, you'll see in the middle of that, issues and opportunities report. So that's we are listening. We're documenting what we've heard, and then how do we develop alternatives that would address the types of things that we're hearing. So as we go out, we want to break the county up, if you will. We want to talk about interactive public meetings in 8 sites. And that allows us to dig in a little more locally and understand that different parts of the county have different needs, different interests, and different understandings of transportation. We want to hear and understand that. So we'll do it through structured meetings, and we'll also do that through digital telephone style meetings. So we're collecting the data, if you will, from the communities. Once we get that, we want to sort of consolidate that up a little bit, because we want to begin to have that regional conversation. We want each community to understand what the differences are and what the opinions are in other places. We don't want it just to be simply grassroots all the way up and that's the answer. Different communities, again, have different interests. Are those interests supporting? Are those interests competing? We need to understand and how to have that conversation as we look at different types of alternatives to address what's going on. So that's the listen and the verify component. When we come back out, then we want to begin to test what is out there. And the way we're going to be looking at that is we have what we're calling scenarios, which will be developing different packages of transportation solutions based on the funding and the different resources that we would have available. This is what you can get for this type of money. And then we want to explore what the thoughts of the community are on those types of things. Again, we're going to do that at the community level with the 8 groups, followed by and supported by 2 regional meetings, and then bring that back again to the 4. You know, the method here is to listen locally and then to bring the conversation up at the regional level, and then ultimately bring the conversation up to the county level as we work through that process. Now, Mike alluded to a very aggressive timeline, and I'm going to stand right here and say absolutely. So the commitment of my team members and the commitment of the community is going to be there, because we will move swiftly, and the conversation is going to be pretty aggressive in terms of the schedule. So we're going to need everyone's help as we move forward on those activities. Now, on this graphic, I want to point out, we put the MPO's work on there, and we put Hart's work on there. And it's very specific, because the work that they're doing has to be included and incorporated in what we're doing. We're not working in a vacuum. We're not starting from scratch. And we're all in a partnership to move the entirety of the transportation conversation forward. So they are on here as willing and understood partners as to where we're going to go and what we're going to do and the relationships therein. And then you'll notice the other lines talk about how we move through the public engagement process and how we move through the technical process that get us towards the March timeframe. And that's our goal. And then at the end of March, the project then turns over and moves ahead through private sector activities. So as we move forward and we leave here today, we'll continue with the activities that we've already started, including the data collection. We'll initiate in a deeper dive some of the public engagement activities. We'll begin to develop the tools and techniques that will be available to all users. They'll be posted on websites and brochures and those types of media tools. We'll work on and continue working on those project definitions. Again, we have the aggregated list. We'll work on those to begin to develop and understand the actual scopes, and then we'll begin to develop the scenarios as we were talking about a little bit earlier. And then my goal is to come back to y'all with a progress report at your December meeting. So I know that's a very quick overview of the activities that we've got ahead of us. Any questions?
Questions?
No questions?
All right.
Yes, sir.
The progress report will come back, you said, in December.
Yes, you have a meeting scheduled, I think it's beginning of December sometime.
And when is the intention then, though, to have you said a plan will come back, and that will be sometime in the March timeframe?
Yes, that's the goal, to bring a plan back at that point that has taken all of the input, and you can see it all in one place and be ready to take action on it.
And that will consist, though, you'll by that time have tested some of the scenarios that George was discussing, is that correct?
Yes.
So then you've got then, it would appear 2015 to then take that plan and begin discussing it in depth with the citizens. Is that your intent?
Well, assuming that the product that you have in front of you in March of 2015 is satisfactory, and that at that point the County Commission is ready to set a referendum for 2016. At that point, as George explained, the effort then becomes a private effort, just as Greenlight is now. It becomes an advocacy effort, because we can't use government money to advocate for a sales tax if that's what we're going to do.
Correct.
So it then, just as it did in 2010 here, although differently and much more successfully, it then moves to a private advocacy effort. We still stay engaged to help educate, but we staff cannot advocate. You all can. Staff cannot do that.
First question, though, that I think voters will ask, and you've done this before, Mike, to be able to clearly articulate why we're doing this. When they look at our budget, it's rather large, and I've heard it said many times before, well, with all that money, my goodness, why would we have to go forward with any new revenue source? Are you prepared to have a white paper or something that explains clearly, as you've done in the past, and you can do it as well again if you want to today, why we're doing this?
Yes. And in the meetings I've had so far, the question either comes up from the group or I bring it up myself, because it's one of those big gorillas in the room that you just need to deal with. And so the question is, what about the CIT? Why do we need another funding source? And half of what has been raised with the CIT has been spent on transportation to date. Between now and the time that the CIT sunsets, half of that will be spent on transportation. But the CIT was also for schools, it was for public safety, it was for libraries, it was for a lot of really important needs that the county had. And so it wasn't never designed to be a transportation funding source at the end of the day. And it does sunset in
26.
And from now until then, it's basically programmed for projects. And in fact, that's why we have, all of us, the cities and the county and Hart, have unfunded projects at this point. Gas tax is one that's easy for people to understand because it's a declining revenue source. And that's intuitive, it's common sense, because we have, more fuel-efficient cars, we have a move towards more non-fossil fuel type of vehicles, automated vehicles. That will continue to be an unreliable source, a declining source. It helps us keep up with the maintenance on the roads we have now. The county's budget, yes, under statute, it's a $4 billion budget, but $2 billion of that is non-cash. It's transfers, it's other accounting things. Our household budget, the cash that we have to spend on services, is just under $2 billion. And roughly 2/3 of that goes to either pay for law enforcement and public safety and fire rescue, or it goes to pay for our utility system or our solid waste system and debt service. That leaves us with 1/3, about $600, $700 million to pay to keep the lights on, to pay for parks, to pay for human services. And what I tell everyone is, in the last 5 years, we've reduced the cost of county government by 20%. No one has lost service. We may have transferred service, but no one's lost service. But we're at a point that, that $650 million that we have left to pay the bills, there is no more room there for transportation. And if we cut that $650 million budget, people will lose service. And that will be another discussion that we don't want to have. I think we've been good stewards. This board has been good stewards. The mayors have been good stewards. We have shown that we can deliver service efficiently. Is there more to do? Of course. There's always better ways, but it's not of an order of magnitude that will pay for, frankly, billions of dollars of transportation needs. So, that message seems to be clear, and I have those conversations. I had it at Progress Village over the weekend. Commissioner Miller was there. And when you lay it out that way, people understand. Now, it doesn't mean that, they're willing to pull the lever tomorrow, but it's beginning a conversation from a different place. And we're going to have to be transparent. We're going to have to justify every dollar, and they're going to hold our feet to the fire. But, we're starting from a different place now, and I think that's palpably different than it has been in the past. So that's the quick and dirty explanation.
There are several other lights. Other questions, but I'm not going to ask any more at this time. I just want to state, though, that I think this is a 180 sea change from where we were in the run-up to 2010. The level of professionalism exhibited by staff, by our administrator, the questions and the involvement of not just the board, but the city council, the mayor, HART, the municipal governments, it's unprecedented. And I think that you've picked, not that there aren't other great companies out there, but you've picked the best. And if we're going to be successful and communicate successfully, you got to have the best out there talking, and as you said, George, listening. Because there are a lot of good folks out here, many in this room, who have different opinions. But at the end of the day, I hope that what you'll be able to produce is a product that we can all as a community rally behind, because I'm tired of watching other communities move while we stand still and debate. And I'm confident you're going to put together a great product and be very successful.
Thank you. And as George said, going forward, this is going to have to be a collaborative effort, and it isn't about me. We need many more people who can go out and do these sessions with the public. I mean, I've done 15 or so, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. We've got 200 of these things to do. So that's why everyone's got to, be able to go out and do this. Catherine and Mike Herr and Jerry Sieber and you all. So we got to marshal a good group here to be able to go out and speak with one voice and listen, not just speak, but listen to what the needs are. So
thank you, sir. Commissioner Hagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple comments and a couple questions. I, for starters, agree with Commissioner Sharp in that the environment and process is dramatically different now than it was in 2010. Back then, if you recall, we were fighting to determine if there would even be a referendum. And I think, for the most part, folks acknowledge that there will be a transportation referendum. It's just, I guess, the timing that we need to ultimately determine on which the best election to have it on the ballot. I do want to say I think it's critically important that we do not lose track of the, no pun intended, Commissioner Chris said, of the initial direction and goals of this group here, which was to align our economic development goals with our transportation planning. I mean, if you even look at our agenda here, transportation for economic development. So I guess the question I have, and I don't know if this is George or Mike, how are we going to ensure that those goals are included in the scope of your work and of the ultimate transportation plan that you'll present to us?
The way that we're proceeding is still on the same basis. We've spent a lot of time analyzing the key economic spaces. They are the foundation of this effort. But alongside of that are community projects. And this gets back to the value proposition. A sidewalk for Progress Village, a road extension has just as much value as a project in our key economic space that might be some fixed guideway project. And so the community projects have to have the same stature, even though, but because, I mean, truly, they are economic development as well. So as someone said to me, the Cs have to live someplace too. The Cs are the CEOs, the CFOs, and the COOs that we're trying to attract from other places in this country to come here and do business. You know, they're not going to live in a community that's not safe, you know, that has the highest pedestrian and bicycle injuries and death rate. You know, they're not going to live in a community where fire and rescue vehicles can't get to the scene because of congestion. That's economic development. Those community projects are extremely important. They have just as much weight. But Commissioner Hagan, yes, this is, we're leveraging off our key assets, just as any business would do. If you want to be able to develop value, you start with your strongest suit. And so our key economic spaces are our strongest suit. They will have a different profile in terms of solutions. But yes, absolutely, we're still on that message.
Well, I think that it makes sense to have, for lack of a better term, a hybrid approach that includes the community projects as well as the key economic areas, or I think you had entitled that Opportunity Fund, I think it's at one point. Last question. I know you started out by saying the three-prong approach, and one was immediacy, and while I 100% agree with that, I think we also want to include in your plan that you present to us flexibility for future boards, future mayors, to include different projects that might not be on the radar right now. I mean, but 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we may want to target growth in different places, or we may have other needs that come about that we cannot predict or foresee right now. So I just want to make sure that the flexibility is included in the plan for future boards and mayors.
Yes, I mean, the contract that we're going to have with residents and voters is that they have a clear understanding of where we want to take the community in terms of transportation. But there has to be flexibility because things do change. The model that works, so always go with something that's been successful, is a CIT. What we built into that model was the ability, and in fact the requirement, to have periodic checkups and public hearings so that the public could have additional input, elected officials, you know, could make a strategic change if they needed to make it, but that overall, holistically, there is a plan, and we're not going to deviate from you know, the larger plan, because that's really the contract we're going to have with folks who are going to be willing to tax themselves to do this. So,
Thanks.
Commissioner Christ?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got several questions here. First, I'd like to thank you for your thoughtfulness in trying to cover the ground we covered when we met one-on-one. After listening to the presentation, though, there's some things I'd like to make sure are recognized on the record. First, currently we have a list. It's about $15 billion worth of wants and wishes, and it's probably going to grow as you meet with more groups. Are we eventually going to actually have an engineered plan, or are we going to be just marketing a list of wishes and wants?
No, actually, what we will have is a plan, and one of the things that we want to go through in the conversation with the communities is which projects can go when. I think it's an understanding that once we understand what the scope of a project is and what the cost of a project is, how then do you go about programming that? So obviously, that's going to open up a community debate on who gets what and when. But I think that's an important part of what we do. So no, it's not going to be a list. It has to be a package of projects that can be worked under whatever financial capacity is available.
All right, so you said a package of projects, so we're actually going to get down into the weeds, into an actual plan that draws and builds on itself.
Yes, yes, but I'd be careful about using the term "in the weeds," because the one thing I want to make sure that we understand, when we talk about a project scope and a definition, I do not want to get into the conversation of it's this specific alignment. I don't want to tie up the conversation or a particular project and allow for flexibility as things would come online, particularly when you talk about the higher capital cost types of projects. But I do expect to have a list of projects and when they can be funded and carried forward. So that would be the anticipation. So there will be projects that are in, and there's projects that are going to be out.
How much of a priority are we going to be giving roads in this plan?
I think that's yet to be seen. The list that we have is fairly well balanced among different modes, different modalities, roads, transit, and sidewalks and trails and repaving, safety projects. But really, until we finish the work and really, so I guess the answer is, in isolation, a road may look like the right solution, just looking at it by itself. But when you start to put it through the PRISM process and you start to look at maybe with a different angle of vision to figure out, well, maybe only part of the road is necessary if we can align it with some sort of transit-oriented development or some other solution. So it's kind of hard to say today what the actual mix will be.
And I understand the hybrid approach and how it all fits together. I guess a concern that I have is, I was president of a large civic group back when the CIT tax was being marketed, and of course at the time your predecessors and our predecessors wanted the 3,000 plus members of that civic group to come on board, and there were a lot of promises made that weren't kept, and there were a lot of projects that were written into the plan that were removed later. So I guess the concern I have is, once we meet with all these groups, once we lock into a plan, how secure is that plan and how flexible in changing that plan once the public has agreed to support what they think is going to come to fruition?
I think the answer is that none of us can predict the needs 5 years, 10 years from now. What's important, though, is that there be a mechanism, a true mechanism of transparency and participation, so that if there has to be a change, everyone can weigh in before that change is made. It would be disingenuous for me to stand here and say, the project list and program we come up with next March, that's it, and the changes are going to be very tiny, because technology alone is going to overcome us, in the next 5 years, 10 years. It's a balance. It's a balance of being forthright and setting expectations, but also letting folks know that life changes. And I don't know. I don't know how else to answer it at this point.
I guess what I'm asking is, are we going to engineer some safeguards in here to provide some level of comfort to these groups or neighborhoods or communities that think that by supporting this, that they'll be getting their important things taken care of, from having to go through the old bait and switch that happened with the CIT?
Yes, there will have to be a mechanism that satisfies folks.
And I guess my last question is an obvious one. Are we ever going to ask the public if they're willing to pay for this? And if so, when? And how?
Yes, we will. That will be part of when we do the market research and we talk about the different scenarios. We'll look at different funding options and how those packages work and what people are willing to pay for and not willing to pay for. And then we can adjust the transportation plan associated, again, with whatever revenues would be available.
And that would be an assessment that would be done countywide and scientifically approached so that we get a good read in each of the districts?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Merman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. It's very good. I want to ask a couple of questions. We did a lot of work in the Economic Prosperity Committee. Did you read that report, and do you agree with how we lined up the economic development centers?
You want to start? And then I'll.
Yes, that's been a foundation document, and the conversation that we've been having so far is that it is about economic prosperity, and that may cause us to look at, for example, land use differently.
Right, that was my next question. Are you also looking at the regulations, land use, alongside of all this to make sure that we're ready and we're not just putting a plan out there that's not realistic for what we can get accomplished because of what's in our LDC or something else?
Right, because if we as a community want to be a more robust transit community, and whatever that means, transit can mean a number of different things, it's hard to do that when it's spread out so far. I mean, everybody understands density drives successful transit systems. And so one of the factors that's very important is how we align land use decisions to encourage more development that's denser, walkable, livable. And that's a conversation that I had with the leadership of TBBA when I met with them a couple months ago. And I think it's a conversation they're open to having. And there's ways to incentivize that without taking away choice. You can still build out there somewhere, but if you want to build more transit-oriented communities and you want to help us become more transit savvy, maybe we'll waive some of those regulatory fees, or maybe all of them. I don't know. I mean, there's different ways to get there, but clearly that is an important discussion, that it's not just about the mode or the choice of the mode, it's about how we are as a community.
Because won't that determine our readiness a lot in the timeframes? Because I was speaking to a women's group last night, and they asked me, well, when, I showed them the map, and, when is all this going to get done? They want us to start tomorrow. And, you don't want to tell somebody it's 10 or 20 years from now, or 15 or 5. They really, depending on their age and where they're at, they may not even live in the same place. So are you giving realistic timeframes, looking at the regulatory environment for the certain area and for when projects, and being able to give us a projection of when by areas projects can actually get done?
Yeah, that goes back to the conversation about the programming of projects with the cost and the timing. And the timing has to be part of what does it take to prepare a project to go to construction. So when we have those conversations on the different projects, we will come back and say, it takes this long to go from where we are today to where it actually can have a ribbon cut. So I think that's an important part, because a lot of people do have that expectation of, I want this tomorrow. And some of these projects simply can't be done that quickly.
And I assume you're looking at the growth, the population growth factors are involved in a lot of these decisions also. Because, if you look at the LRTP that the MPO did, most of the growth is going into South County. And yet they only had a bus circulator system and a few road improvements designed for that. Yet they have all these people that are going to live and have to travel a long way, to work somewhere else. And I think that we need to be a little more visionary, especially in looking at population growth, about what a community actually needs, not just what they need today.
Agree completely. And one of the things that we'll do, and it's a question I ask all the time, is tell me what's the problem? What problem are we trying to solve? Rather than come in with a transportation answer and trying to fit that in. I don't want that. Tell me what the need is, and then we can work with the community to come up with the most appropriate solution.
Okay, well, that's good. Well, I'm looking forward to see what you come back with, and I know this is kind of where the rubber hits the road, where our leadership and this group will emerge and have to make some really tough decisions. I do, and I know I've talked about with this, Mr. Merrill, is, the financing side of it, and being able, this group, to look at every single option available to us, that we don't pigeonhole ourselves into any one particular piece for a referendum, that we look under every rock and see what funding is available out there, and maybe separating the capital from the operating, and have different funding sources for each of those, different things like that. So I hope you'll look at that as you move forward. Thank you.
Chairman Suarez?
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple questions for Mr. Walton. On your presentation, you mentioned some of the other referenda that you have worked on: Seattle, Los Angeles, Denver, Louisiana, and South Carolina. Were all those successful projects that went to the voters and got passed, or
Yes.
were all of them first time through, or second time, or a combination?
I don't know. The first time through? For the most part, yes.
Okay. I know that it seems to me, I don't know much about the Louisiana or the South Carolina transportation initiatives as opposed to the other three. Yeah, most of the other three were primarily transit, and the other two were maybe a little bit of a mix of the two?
Correct. The other two were statewide initiatives where, in essence, in South Carolina, the Department of Transportation had an aggressive work program. They realized there was no way they were going to be able to deliver that on their own. So they outsourced, in essence, split the state in two, and they had program management teams come in and actually deliver their work program for them. Very similar with Louisiana.
Would you say that the other three, the first three, Seattle, Los Angeles, and Denver, were primarily transit projects, meaning that a larger percentage of the monies were going directly to some mode of transit as opposed to a holistic transportation plan?
Yes.
Okay. The reason I asked is I wanted to know what the time frame was for each of these in terms of sort of your process when you go through PRISM and all the other processes that you presented to us to the final product, and then to the next step, which is to try and convince the public to support that particular product. What was the time frame, or do you know on each of these? Just generally, it doesn't have to be exact.
Generally, those were about, I would say, 12 to 18 months in duration, just to be able to get the plan and those activities. And that's for the planning elements. That's not for the advocacy work and those types of things.
Right, because those are probably separate than what you typically do.
Correct.
Because that's not really your expertise as much as the engineering part of it.
Correct.
Okay.
I mean, we understand the relationships of how the conversations are going to evolve from where we stand right now and the relevance of what gets carried forward. So I would argue that this one is a very aggressive transportation plan from a schedule.
And so if I'm reading the time frame correctly, you're looking at completing by March of 2015 your portion of this before we start going into the advocacy portion of it, meaning that this is the skeleton of the plan that we want to look at in terms of those projects. And, it's not going to be tightly fit where everything is absolutely perfect, that every transit plan is in there or transportation plan is in there. But this is kind of the general sense of where the public is going and so on, correct?
That is correct.
All right. And then I know that you listed on here HART's transit development plan is overarching because we end that at the end of November 2015. So we're going to leave some room open for whatever HART's plans are, I guess, to dovetail with the rest of the stuff that we've already had, correct?
That is correct. But because of some of the elements that will be getting started earlier in the year, particularly with the public engagement, those components then can migrate into the work that would have to be done by HART on their TDP as well. So I do think there's synergies open for those conversations.
Okay, and the lady in white wants to say something. Go ahead, Ms. Egan.
I'll tap out.
I sneak in so subtly. Thank you, Chairman. As you're aware, we are doing the big update for our TDP this year. And given the breadth and scope of the outreach, which has to go on to make this project successful, it would be not crazy, but very irresponsible to have this big project going on and then come a few months later and say, hey, what'd you think? Where are we going? So the intent from a staff perspective is for HART to piggyback on this involvement, get all the involvement we need for the TDP from there. And when Mr. Merrill said earlier there could be HART funding available, it would be funding which we would put into the regular public involvement process of the TDP. So two birds in one stone. And then that ensures that whatever is wrapped up in this process is our TDP and they are the same projects.
Well, one last question, and this is kind of a specific question, and maybe for you, Ms. Egan. In terms of, let's say, as part of the public outreach that PB is going to do, comes out, and most of what we get is, yes, we want this type of transportation or transit plan. Okay, whatever it is, doesn't matter the mode, but this is what we want. What do we have to do in terms of HART, in terms of alternative analysis, and some of the other things that the feds want for us to do in relation to, because now we are trying to dovetail both our transit development plan with the wants and abilities and needs of the county, and so we've got to fit the two together. How does that work in terms of when we get to referendum in 2016?
I will let George talk more about the specifics for an alternatives analysis. The HART Board obviously is a federal grantee, is in a special and unique role about this. For a project that would require an AA, the HART Board would be authorizing going through different process, but at this point, I don't think the county process is leading to an AA with a line and a this and a that. So I am not, from a planning perspective, concerned that we'll go out and folks will say, do this and do this in 3 weeks. I think the process is in a healthy place for people to speak up and say this really is what they want. We can verify those needs and then move forward on the appropriate steps to investigate. But I'm sure these guys have more information.
Yeah, and my point, and maybe this will clarify it a little bit, is that that we are prepared once 2016 rolls around, that when 2016 rolls around, that when 2017 starts, that we are well along the way for our AA, so that we can have whatever dollars are available to us from the county, in addition to dollars available from the federal government, so that we can make it as smooth and as quick as possible, regardless of what the process is going to be.
Agreed. If I may elaborate just briefly.
Sure,
on
go ahead.
the AA question. From the transportation plan, to illustrate, perhaps there's a point-to-point connection where we would talk about fixed guideway, right? I don't want to get into what mode. I don't want to get into those types of things. I don't think it's appropriate for a plan to do that per se. And we might highlight where some station locations could be. Once the plan is established and you understand that, then it would be turned over into an AA process where then you really go in and you grind and look at, is it this type of technology? And if so, then what are my requirements associated with that? What are my station spacings? What type of parking could I get at each of those stations? The alternatives analysis would go through and vet all of those conversations out and work again through the community environment to do that. So the plan will set up those types of conversations, but I don't think the plan should dictate specific alignment, specific mode, and those types of things. So
Right.
I think that would be the relationship as to how the plan would migrate to a HART work program.
It's a football team where you've put together the plan, and now you give us the ball, and we just run with it from there.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Appreciate it.
I think a lot of heads were nodding when you discussed not dictating the type, the specific alignment, or the mode. That's correct. Let me ask you, you did list a lot of groups that you're going to be reaching to, very, very detailed. What about young, the workforce, the future workforce? You know, I don't want to use, the word, the millennials that everyone's talking about. We've had every group here to list. I think we left out vegans. But we're going to reach.
Hey, leave the vegans alone.
Listen, I'm a 75% one of those. But are you going to, though, seriously, when Bloomberg was reporting several days ago that 19%, of 19-year-olders, 30% don't have a driver's license. Now, as we're building a system and we're looking out towards the future, are we going to be talking to the future? Do you intend to talk to the future workforce and bring them into the conversation?
Thank you, Commissioner. I will allow Marco. Stand up, Marco. Not everyone knows Marco.
Young person.
Marco Sandusky is the manager of compliance and programs at HART, and last Wednesday actually held the inaugural meeting for a regional chapter for young professionals in transit. It is a nationwide organization, and they are targeting specifically millennials. So these are the folks in that demographic, very interested in transportation in various shapes and sizes. So we've got a great opportunity here. Now that you know you're going to be working more, sorry. But this is just one example of how we are getting in charge of this outreach. So we've got these millennials listings in ways that make sense to them, and they can give us information, which is useful on a transit side. And I guarantee there are a whole bunch of other things like that lined up.
And you're also, though, you're talking, though, about building a system. This is not either or. There seems to be this debate that Joel Koch and Richard Florida kind of, you're either only going to use transit or you're going to drive a car, which to me seems to be silly. We're talking about, are you talking about building a system where people have options and choices and can decide, today I want to drive, but, tomorrow I might be going out with friends and it's just too difficult to find parking, or I'd rather not have to worry about my car. Is that the type of system you're building?
Yes. I mean, we have to look at how the communities are going to grow, where they're going to grow, and what are the expectations. If we're looking at what we're doing today, then we're not doing our job.
Awesome. Commissioner Miller.
Well, let's be ever mindful for those of us who are well over 60 that the system also has to worry about those of us that one day will not be wanting or maybe even able to drive, that can get around and go to our doctor's appointments and things along those lines. So I heard, let me tell you, if you have not heard Mr. Merrill's presentation at all, and I know it's early in the process, if you have not heard it, you need to hear it. He went into the Lion's Den on this past Saturday, and I say the Lion's Den because he went to Progress Village, which is basically a minority community that was vastly against the 2010 proposal. I was running in 2010, and that's all I heard when I was out there. But Mr. Merrill went in and talked about exactly what this, I shouldn't say exactly, but what the perception of what this whole plan would be, especially for neighborhoods like that one, where you have young people out there that talks about the transportation and what their needs were, but also some of the older people out there that talks about the fact of what I just said, that they're getting up in age, they will not be able to drive, they have to get to appointments, and Mr. Merrill talked about what his perception would be and what we were looking at in this community of getting those needs to those people in that community. There were some smaller projects they wanted to talk about, what we're going to run into as we go across this county. But it was important that he went out there and talked to them about what this county wants to do for them in this particular project. And I saw a vast turnaround in the thought process of the people in Progress Village compared to what it was 4 years ago. Number one, someone's talking to them. They didn't do that in 2010. Candidates were out there, and I wasn't an expert on this at that particular point, still not, but someone was there talking to them in a language that they understood, that they grasped and was willing to work with it. And Mike told me at the end, a lady walked up to him, a little old lady, and says, I wish I could be alive to see this happen. And that's important. So, we got both sides of the spectrum. We got the young people like this young man here, and the millenniums, I don't know what you call people over 60, or probably ancient, but or the millenniums who want to have transportation in the way they want to see it, but also those that are, and this county will continue to go older, that will need the transportation that we're talking about to do the things they need to do and get what they want to go. It's not all about tracks. It's not all about tracks. It's about a mixture of things. It's about the dash that Los Angeles has. It's about the tracks. It's about individual pickups of senior citizens that can go to where they need to go and those kind of things. So if you have not been with Mr. Merrill to hear his presentation, I would advise you to please go. Go. I've given him a list of, he's going to be busy for a while in my area, a list of people he needs to talk to. And believe me, the presentation that he gives, it gets their eyes wide open and started thinking about what's going on.
It's an awesome way to conclude. Any other questions or comments?
Thank you very much for your attention. We will move forward with all speed and deliberate speed, and thank you, George, and your team for being part of this. And we'll be back to you one-on-one before December, but officially December we'll be back to you as a group. So thank you all for your support.
Thank you both.
Well done. We rehearsed.